And we should be live. Awesome. Hi guys, welcome to the live stream. It's normally a relatively informal chat, but this week we have, well, actually it's probably still going to be a relatively informal chat, but this week we have, Ian Cuttress from ANandTech. There's links in the description if you want to check him out. But yeah, the main topic we want to talk about is the interesting AMDFLAWS.com website and the vulnerabilities and CTS labs and all that fun stuff. So yeah, Ian, do you want to give yourself a bit of an introduction?
So, hi everybody, my name's Ian Cuttress. I'm the senior editor at ANandTech. We cover CPU microarchitecture and do product reviews and try and weasel our way up in the industry to make sure we get all the premium content as deep as we can go. So yeah, when companies starts talking about processor and platform flaws, we usually try to be right on the money with all the details we've got.
Awesome. So I suppose we should kind of just jump into it. So for those who haven't necessarily been listening to the news over the last day or two, I suppose, probably I guess this week, was that was it launched on Sunday or Monday morning?
Tuesday, I think.
Okay, Tuesday. So early this week, if nothing else, the AMDFLAWS website was announced or launched with some 13 vulnerabilities on 13th. Yeah, there was quite a few vulnerabilities. So Ian, could you give us a quick sort of rundown of the differences and what the sort of attack vectors you would be going through to get use of these?
So the announcement was made for a series of secondary vulnerabilities with AMD's latest Ryzen processors. If you remember back a few months ago with Meltdown and Spectre, which were two classes of vulnerabilities applicable to mostly Intel processors. Here, what the security researchers have done is split their findings into 4 different categories based on the type of attack, how it's performed, and which processors it affects. Now, they've said 13 vulnerabilities, and they've named them 1, 2, and 3. Some of these, they haven't actually gone into detail about what makes one different to another, which is part of the story we'll pick up on in a little bit. But yeah, four names, which they apparently named using their ingenuity and imagination. So some of these do seem weird, and if you pick a name out of a hat, it's not necessarily what you'd go with. But first vulnerability I'll talk about is master key. There are 3 types of master key vulnerability, and they don't say what makes them necessarily different in their disclosure. But this is a series of vulnerabilities that will disable AMD's secure processor. So the secure processor is a tiny ARM Cortex core based in EPYC Ryzen Pro, and Ryzen Mobile processors, designed to offer security features like secure virtualization and all the typical things that you kind of see with Intel vPro and the enterprise chips there. So this is just AMD's version of that with their features, with things like hardware validated boot and primarily professional grade features used by, for example, the cloud companies like Microsoft Azure and Google AWS, Amazon AWS, and Google Cloud. So being able to disable the secure processor means that the person using the server won't have those secure features, which means that if you have 2 competing virtual machines on a system, then one could necessarily read the other's memory, and that can be pretty bad. The way that this vulnerability is executed is by actually updating the BIOS on the system, which seems kind of weird. And when this was announced, we did see a few comments that, well, doesn't that mean you need physical access to the system? Now, that's because most people are used to the modern way of flashing BIOSes through the BIOS with a USB key. Though back in the past, and mostly in the server space, you actually have to have an executable program with your BIOS file, your 8 meg, your 16 meg file in order to do it. So you don't need physical access for it, but you do need to flash the BIOS, which requires admin access. And a lot of people will say, well, if you have admin access, isn't the system screwed already? Yeah, pretty much. Though what this vulnerability does, what master key does, and what a number of the others do, is allow the attacker to do nefarious things to the system, and then leave the system and give it back to you without you knowing. So the best thing to parallel it to is somebody finding the key to your house. That's them getting the admin access and then installing cameras that you wouldn't know. So they can monitor you. This can lead to nefarious things like blackmail or corporate espionage or stealing secrets and so forth. That's more so with perhaps some of the other vulnerabilities, but master key is disabling secure processes. And what the security company has done is showcase this on Epic and Ryzen, but they've only theorized it on Ryzen Pro and Ryzen Mobile. They do have the systems internally apparently, but they just haven't bothered to run the executable. I don't know. So that's vulnerability number one. Number two is called Chimera, and this attacks the Promontory chipset on AMD Ryzen platforms. So this is mainly applicable to Ryzen and Ryzen Pro, where you have your X370, your B350, your A320, your B300, your A300 chipset. Now these are designed by a company called ASMedia. ASMedia are well known for making USB 3 controllers and hubs. That's how most people know them, though what AMD did when they were designing Ryzen is turn around and say, we don't really have the expertise or enough people to design our own chipsets, so we're going to pay ASMedia to do it. And that's what they did. They designed their chip on a 55 nanometer process, uses a lot of the ASMedia IP that they buy. Now, technically, ASMedia is a subsidiary of ASUS Tech, ASUS, so you can kind of link it in there. Now, what the security company has done is they're able to, with admin access, reflash the firmware on the chipset or the USB host controller. What reflashing the firmware does means that the attacker can put their own firmware on. So this is called chipset code execution, which then can put monitoring programs. Now, so chipsets deal with all the I/O. They do with keyboard, Ethernet, webcam. So if you have the ability to put your own code in the chipset, you can easily put in a monitoring program and see what people are doing.
Yeah. And
it kind of barrel rolls from there. Yes, again, you do need admin access, so technically, the system is kind of screwed regardless. But yeah, this is a secondary attack. This is after you've got the admin access. So that's number two. That's Chimera. And so now we're into the realm of really weird names. This one's called Rise and Fall. What was the Bond name? What was the Bond film with Skyfall? I'm not sure if it's based on that or whatever. So Rise and Fall, there are 4 versions of this exploit, apparently. To be honest, you can kind of mash them all into one, which is what most security companies would have done, but they've singled them out into 4. This is, again, around the secure processor. But this time it revolves around the fact that the secure processor technically runs an operating system on it. So this is preloaded before the main system starts up and loads your Windows or your Linux. This is what makes all the security possible. And the secure OS, it uses, again, this is the ARM Cortex-A5 core, uses ARM's Trust Zone technology, which is an IP that they license. So normally you speak of ARM in the context of smartphones. This is just IP that ends up in processors because this is how AMD has implemented their security protocols. So this deals with passwords and cryptography. And what Rise and Fall does is it exploits the secure memory regions of the secure processor. So the 4 vulnerabilities that the security company has developed it relates to memory writing, memory reading, protection, and code execution. So going back to the master key and Chimera, this is kind of an all-in-one for the secure processor. This is most relevant on consumer systems. So this is most relevant on Ryzen. And the security company has validated all these attacks on Ryzen, most of them on Ryzen Pro, one of them on Ryzen Mobile, and the one that they've managed to enable on Ryzen Mobile is the memory write. They can't do a memory read, which if you can't read memory, you can't find out necessarily where to write memory.
Yeah.
But this is they're just putting it all out there. So the final security vulnerability that they announced was called Fallout. So here you've got Fallout 1, 2, and 3. I think the reason why they've called this Fallout, I reckon, opinion, citation needed, is because it does the same thing as Ryzen Fall, which we just described. It gives you write access, read access, and it can disable the secure OS on the security processor. The reason why they've called it Fallout is because it applies only to Epic. Right. It's very likely that the same code is probably used. But actually, no, I'll backtrack that. It does have a slightly different attack method by going into the secure OS boot system.
Right.
How they're circumventing and getting access is through the bootloader instead. Right. Again, you still need admin access, and it allows you to go in and mess with that. So that's their kind of 13 vulnerability list, which falls under 4 names. The names have, are designed, I guess, for somewhat maximum impact. Same with Meltdown and Spectre, and previously with things like Heartbleed and Shell Shock. Give a vulnerability a fancy name, and it gives the media a vector to kind of showcase what's going on. Whether that's the right thing or due to not is either here nor there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can argue that till the cows come home, actually.
Let's not bother. Obviously, as you mentioned, a lot of these vulnerabilities all require admin access at minimum, and as you kind of mentioned, to a level, if you have admin access to a machine, whether it's a server or whether it's a client PC, you kind of have control of that PC already. Is there sort of actually I do have a Ryzen 1700X in my PC that I'm streaming with right now, actually. So as someone who is a Ryzen owner, is this something that the average person should be worried about? Is this something that AMD can fix easily enough, given some time?
Well, I mean, the point is, if you have admin access on a system and you want to find out, okay, I'll backtrack. So the first thing is you get access to the system. The next thing is you try and get admin access to the system.
Yeah.
With admin access, you can delete files, install software. You can pretty much do anything. The purpose of getting admin access to actually do destructive damage is already there. The next stage with these attacks is implementing like the monitoring software that I've mentioned. Yeah. So they can take the details as a homeowner, as an individual with a Ryzen system, are you likely to be targeted by this flaw? Probably not. Can somebody download some wishy-washy download and end up with their system compromised? Yes. With regards to actually making sure that the system is secure, that's a question for AMD.
Yeah.
And I mean, whether mitigations are possible is actually something that we discussed with the security company yesterday. They invited us on a call, and one of the things we went through is that, and I'm speaking with AMD about how their progress is going with analyzing these vulnerabilities. So usually with vulnerabilities like this, there are two ways to solve them, like we saw with Meltdown and Spectre. You can either fix them in hardware or you can fix them in software. Now, back with Meltdown and Spectre, some required hardware fixes. Now, by hardware fixes, this either means you actually need a completely fresh bit of silicon, or the company can go into the firmware and disable bits of silicon that are affected.
Yeah.
So one of the issues, I forget which one it is, Meltdown or Spectre, was to do with the branch predictor. Now, that part of the process can be adjusted using publicly undocumentable features that Intel can mess around with to make it less of a problem. Now, there is a performance hit to doing that, and that's kind of the downside of what those vulnerabilities were. But that was something that needed a hardware fix that they fixed with the firmware to deal with the hardware. Now, there are also vulnerabilities that you can do in software that cause the operating system to just process things differently. So as and when AMD has mitigations or other security companies come out with mitigations for these issues, time will tell.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a little bit of fluff with how this company disclosed these vulnerabilities that we're going to go into.
Yeah.
But again, these are secondary attack vector that require admin access. So the chances of them getting into your system are small. But when they are, they can do damage. It's kind of, you know, the barrier to entry to get in is so high, but when you can do a lot of damage. Yeah.
So I take it these sorts of vulnerabilities, obviously, with so the ones that affect Epic more, these are ones that would obviously be more targeted, or the vulnerabilities that would probably be more targeted toward data center attacks, where you'd end up with effectively more results for your money, right?
Well, if you attack a financial institution built on Epic, then you can analyze trades that are going on and perhaps reverse engineer the algorithms that are being done. But there is a secondary complication with servers, which the security company fails to mention, which we probed them on, and they agreed with us that it's less of an issue than perhaps the language that they have used in their disclosure would suggest.
Yeah, I mean, so is there anything specific you would like to cover on the vulnerability side before we move on, or should we carry on with the fluff as you?
Well, so on the vulnerability side, there have. I mean, we'll get into it, but these vulnerabilities have been double and triple confirmed by companies that I'm not necessarily familiar with. I'm not involved necessarily in InfoSec, information security, as my day job, so I don't know this industry perhaps as well as I do the motherboard industry or CPU industry. But there have been people from those companies that have come out and said, we've worked with a security company and we've seen all the details. And yes, these vulnerabilities do exist. But the word we got from the security company is those companies had like 4 or 5 days to kind of analyze this stuff before it went live. So I expect that it'll take AMD at least that long before they come out with a proper full official response. Now, given that this all came out on Tuesday, I'd be glad if we got a response tomorrow on Friday. Chances are we're probably going to have to wait Monday, and there will be a lot of people at AMD not getting a lot of sleep.
Yeah. So I think the general consensus on the actual vulnerabilities themselves are that they're relatively unlikely to be implemented or executed because of the requirement of admin access. But if they are implemented, then they could be relatively serious.
Yeah. I mean, overriding this, there is still perhaps, I don't have a source that I trust that actually says that these vulnerabilities exist. You know, it's you're waiting. As a journalist, when I approach these stories, I have to have a trusted source that basically says, yes, this is correct. I haven't had that yet, though. All arrows point towards that. Yes, you know, these could very well be genuine vulnerabilities, and if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it deserves to be on my dinner plate. I don't know.
Yeah. So I mean, to rewrap it, that's you haven't necessarily had proper confirmation from someone you trust that these are definitely as stated vulnerabilities. It looks like they are. A number of people have said that they are, but kind of want to just get final confirmation on
the best confirmation I've had so far I've seen is a Microsoft security expert on Twitter say that these are genuine.
Right.
Unfortunately, I don't know the guy. I've never conversed with him before. I've reached out to him, but I haven't had a response yet.
Okay. So yeah, are we okay to talk about the companies themselves?
Yeah. So I think the best way to start this off is by saying normally when something like this occurs, the company who finds the exploit gives the manufacturer 30, 60, or 90 days notice in advance before going public. This company gave AMD 24 hours, which throws up a big red flag. You know, if you look at Spectre and Meltdown, just because they're in the forefront of everybody's mind when it comes to security, you know, AMD and Intel knew about those, and ARM knew about those, what, 6-7 months before being made public, and there was a concerted effort from the industry to be able to do it, to be able to fix it. And you know, the announcement came a few days earlier than expected because some things got leaked, which meant that my flight over to CES was meant I had blacked out for 15 hours of travel. Came back and then read all about it. But the reason that there was such a long period of what they call responsible disclosure is because the people that found the issues were from Google Project Zero. In this case, the security company that has published details about these exploits are unknown. This is literally their first public paper that they've ever submitted, that they've ever pushed live. So there's two red flags. Brand new company finds vulnerabilities in AMD's high-end platform. Second, they've only given AMD 24 hours to even respond. And I keep saying the security company because I don't know. I guess I've written the company's name so many times over the past few days. They're called CTS Labs. CTS-labs.com looks like a very generic pre-built website that you get from a PR company. And they're a company that has been around for just under a year, at least officially. When I spoke to them, they said they got together in early 2017. Based in Israel, most of the employees are ex-members of the Israeli unit 8200, which is kind of like their CIA, NSA tech security that employs people straight out of high school. So in Israel, you have to do some form of military service. For these guys, their form of military service is working in the intelligence department as 18-year-olds that are pre-screened when they're still in high school. So these people are technologically competent to be able to have gone through, you know, what is the equivalent of a computer science degree and also worked in cybersecurity research. I have no doubt on the fact that they have a history in dealing in security and cybersecurity. What they don't have a history in is announcing vulnerabilities public. So everything that they've done between when they were involved in that unit some 10 years ago and now, some of them were involved in distributed computing, some were involved with embedded systems, some were involved with security. They've never had to, through their personal life or through their work or through any consultancy, ever had to make any vulnerability that they've found through security audits with their customers public. So this is their first ever public announcement. So if we talk about AMDFLAWS.com, the website that they produced in order to showcase all this information, again, like the website, it's been professionally designed. They had time to create graphics for this thing. It was sleek. If you remember the Spectre and Meltdown website that came up straight after Google Project Zero, the Google Project Zero stuff was basically a Blogspot page, and it was just put in there. The Spectre and Meltdown pages were a couple of graphics and then a link to a PDF, and then for discussion, go here. This was a full-on, sort of. You know how you go to a motherboard vendor's website to look at motherboards and you keep scrolling down and they have,
keep scrolling
and text comes in and images come in.
All flies in and animated nicely and
exactly. Well, so the AMDFLAWS website didn't do any of the animation, but you can keep scrolling because it keeps coming information. And there were 9 separate links on the web page to their white paper, so they clearly want you to go read it. I forget how long the document was. It was around some 30 pages. And in this white paper, they described all the vulnerabilities in minimal detail. So when Google Project Zero released to the public after the responsible disclosure period, all the information that was provided basically gave detailed information about how why the exploits occur, or why the vulnerabilities happen, essentially how to exploit it. I can't remember if they didn't go as far as providing proof of concept code, but very quickly, based on the information, other security people produced proof of concept code.
Proof of concept code pretty quickly after the announcement.
Because people knew the information. What CTS Labs have done with these 13 vulnerabilities is just say, well, this is what it does. It's exploited through this. You need this level of access, and here's like a table summary. So if you remember back to when I was saying, well, the master key vulnerabilities, master key 1, 2, and 3, they haven't actually split out the difference between 1, 2, or 3 in any of the text. They haven't disclosed any of this. It's simply a high level, like I say, 30-page document describing the exploits, which is unusual. Normally when a company does, especially such a public disclosure, without giving any reasonable time for the company to respond,
let alone fix the vulnerabilities themselves.
It's kind of two ends of a seesaw, right? Now, normally with vulnerabilities like this, you get what's called the CVE number, which is like a bug tracking database for vulnerabilities, especially in hardware. To get this, you go to the MITRE Corporation website and you fill in, or if you are a trusted company like AMD or Google or a security company, you can issue your own CVE numbers. So when Project Zero came out with Meltdown and Spectre, everybody had all the CVE numbers, and that became the center for discussing it and how the vulnerabilities were analyzed. In this case, CTS Labs haven't done it, and the response is, sorry, we're new at this, which is weird, because you'd think for a company that hired a PR company to manage their website and do the creation and produce videos about this stuff, you'd think that that would be part of the role of the company to do. With CVE numbers, if you're a very well-known security firm that doesn't have automatic access, when you find a vulnerability and you want to put it into the database, you can put one into the database and still keep it private. So when you want to go public, everybody can see it. It's like YouTube. You can either put a private video, or you can have a publish at a certain time video. Those companies can get a CVE number within hours. If you're a lesser well-known company, it can take weeks. What the smaller security companies do when they find a vulnerability as part of the responsible disclosure, say to AMD or say to Intel, they'll go to AMD, they'll go to Intel and say, look, we've got these vulnerabilities. Can you rig up some CVE numbers? And because they're a bigger company, it will be processed faster. And they come out. And so one of the big things that's kind of irked some of the security people in the industry is, well, there aren't CVE numbers. So how beyond going to the AMDFLAWS website and giving them their clicks, how else can we just discuss it in a better way? So That's another flag. I know how many more flags do you want to go on? I mean, somebody in the comments has mentioned the green screen on the video. So I wasn't necessarily too concerned about that because that kind of rolls into the PR firm creating website thing. So in the video where they talked about the flaws, it was what, a 90-second video. They had three of the executives on the screen talking about what they'd found, in very brief terms. This wasn't like a roundtable discussion or anything. And the backgrounds behind them were Shutterstock images based on a green screen. Now, I mean, yes, it kind of looks weird because if we go back to Spectre and Meltdown, nobody felt the need to do that. This was clearly part of the promotion of the flaws, designed to promote the company. Now, as a security company that wants to find flaws, you ideally want to promote yourself to get more business.
Especially a newer company, I would assume, right?
This isn't, I wouldn't put this isn't the way it's normally done, but I wouldn't necessarily flag them as a serious thing just for doing a green screen video. The big thing is they only gave AMD 24 hours. If you want if you can't see the forest for the trees and the green screen is a tree, that's green. So that's kind of neither here nor there. They did host the white paper on a secondary website, a secondary domain URL. Their official line for that is in case they got DDoSed, because I guess they're expecting news about this to spread like wildfire. I have no idea. Another thing that was found was that the AMDFLAWS website that they hosted on was actually registered on the 22nd of February, so several weeks ago. So again, they've prepared for this for several weeks, but only given AMD 24 hours notice. The PR firm that they hired to do all this has been completely unresponsive. Nobody's been able to get in contact. So the email doesn't work. The phone numbers say that the inboxes are full. The PR company I haven't heard of in the tech industry. They kind of work more in the security industry. But I bet they're wondering what they've let themselves into. So yeah, I don't know what other weird things happened with this company.
Well, I suppose I know the Viceroy Research company was rather immediately involved. I mean, is there anything else specifically with CTS Labs? I know you had a call with them yesterday, so is there anything you want to cover before we jump onto the other angles?
So, I mean, they did, as a result of all the press that came out, the CEO called Ido Lyon did reach out to a number of press and offered them press calls. Actually, I want to take a step back. It looks like when they released it, some press were already pre-briefed about this announcement, which was also a bit weird.
Interesting.
So we think CNET and possibly Bloomberg already had the information ready to go.
Right.
So they might have actually been told before AMD even, which is weird. When asked about this, CTS Labs feigned ignorance and said they didn't know anything about that, or they would have to go check. But yeah, so they did reach out for a call, and based on a couple of family things, I missed them. But the next day, after there was a chance for more information to kind of be researched by the industry as a whole, I did get on a call, and joining me was David Cantor, who is a known element in the semiconductor space. He writes a lot about processor architecture. His job currently, as industry consultant, means he works with all the big people, or Facebook, the Googles, and also the minor companies in San Francisco area who develop small chips. He has a website called Real World Technologies, and if you go onto the forums there, it's all very deep discussion, specifically on how processors are designed and whether certain methods work. And people like Linus Torvalds, the person who is the father of Linux. He posts there as well. It's a very niche but focused and really amazing website to read. So David is a friend of AnandTech, and he didn't get, because he doesn't do like sort of news publishing like we do. He wasn't going to get a call, but I caught him on Twitter and brought him in because we're essentially almost tag teamed this company for them. So we got on a call, 40 minutes, a few easy questions to start. How did CTS Labs start? Then we got into some of the meat about, why did you do a 1-day disclosure rather than, a 90-day disclosure? The response was that it came in multiple parts. Some of them contradicted what they said later in the call, which was weird. So number one, they thought this was very important to the public, and that customers should know, before AMD has a chance to fix. Number two, that they believed that AMD would not be able to fix it within a reasonable disclosure time. So they wanted to go ahead and jump the gun. And three, they felt that if they did do responsible disclosure, that they would have to wait until AMD actually had fixes, and then that AMD would play down the issue, not make it as severe as they think it is. So they felt like that the industry standard paradigm for responsible disclosure is flawed, and that for something this serious, or something that they feel is this serious, it should be made public, pretty much straight away. However, when we questioned them whether they would have done the same with Meltdown and Spectre, which are arguably 10 times more serious, they refused to give a concrete answer, saying that each situation is different. So they started giving us a very unilateral way of presenting vulnerabilities to the public without reasonable disclosure, and then immediately kind of backtracked on that by saying, well, Meltdown and Spectre may have been done differently because it's a different vulnerability. That kind of didn't make sense to me.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that would confuse me a little too.
We go on to ask. Let me bring up. I just finished transcribing.
Like 6,000 words or something. I don't envy you. So you guys, this is what real journalism is meant to be. Not an idiot like me. Okay, just listen to him.
We went over reasons why they haven't even provided simple proof of concepts. They have a portion on the AMDFLAWS website that is essentially, if you have mitigations for these vulnerabilities, please send us. To which we said, well, if you've not given anybody any details, how can anybody send you? Yeah, it's kind of self-defeatist. To which their response was, well, we're working with security companies, so they will let us know if they find. Well, then why do you have an email address on the bottom of the website? And then they turned around and said, well, we can't be the only people working on this. So which the response is, well, then there must be a similar amount of people also exploiting it. So what is the downside to actually not providing proof of concepts? Again, they couldn't kind of marry those two ideas together, and they just said, this is the way we want to do it. They were very forthright about it. We asked them about the secondary security company that they use to validate the vulnerabilities. So if a security company finds a vulnerability, they have two options. Either one, they hire a subcontractor to go through the code and say, yes, you're right, no, you're wrong. Now, when I say hire, yes, this is a business, so you have to pay people money for their time. Or they go straight to the vendor and they deal with the vendor, and the vendor confirms the vulnerabilities and what have you. So they went for the first option. They got in contact with a company called Trail of Bits. They're a security auditing focused company based in hardware and software. I'm not actually sure where they are globally. But they gave Trail of Bits and a guy called Dan Guido, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, about 4 or 5 days to go through it. Now, the way the story pans out is, so Trail of Bits and CTS know each other through a mutual friend. That's how they got in contact. And out of curiosity, Trail of Bits turned around and said, okay, we'll have a look. And then they were expecting one vulnerability to come through. And then when they get the document that has 13, they turn around and said, this is going to take some time. Here's our weekly fee. And that's the invoice. And I believe Reuters has confirmed that, like a $16,000 payout was made, though CTS Labs would not confirm that. They told us to speak to Trail of Bits. So they did that. Trail of Bits didn't publish anything on their site about the work they did. This guy Dan Guido, I think he's the CEO, went to Twitter and said, yes, these vulnerabilities are real. Now, again, I don't necessarily know who Trail of Bits are. I've never had any contact with that company, so I don't know what weight to put. And one of the issues in this tech industry, where we mostly focus on PC and smartphone components, is that we don't necessarily know who these security companies are. So it was going to take a bit more than just Trail of Bits for us to say these vulnerabilities work and we can confirm, especially when they haven't necessarily done a post on the website. All they've done is spoken through Twitter.
I think I did see these tweets where you're trying to sort of confirm what the arrangement was with them. Am I right in saying that they so did you say, was it Trail of Bits who contacted CTS Labs, or the other way around there?
No, so CTS Labs through a mutual friend got in contact with Trail of Bits. Right,
and they were CTS Labs were explicitly asking them to take a look first before they contacted AMD. That
Correct.
Was their right. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So as far as what CTS Labs told us, there are now several companies in the chain that have all the documents. CTS Labs said that in the deck, in the kind of pack that they give these companies, that they give the security companies and the vendors that have requested this information, is all the technical documentation to say what the vulnerabilities are, all the code that they've used to exploit them, and also step-by-step instructions on how to replicate it.
Right.
So it's kind of Delia Smith's cookbook. Other cookbooks are available, but yeah, the idea is that somebody with some semblance of security knowledge could follow the pattern and reproduce these. So we asked, well, can you sign under NDA for us to get, so we can have a look at the code, so we can reproduce it, so we can give it a green tick.
Yeah.
We got a very interesting, unexpected response from that. They turned around and said that due to Israeli export law, they are unable to share security vulnerabilities with non-security focused companies outside of Israel. Though apparently that doesn't apply to companies inside Israel.
Right.
So they could share it with trusted press in Israel, maybe. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert in Israeli export law by any means. However, I do have some industry contacts who deal with some companies in Israel, and the response I got to that was, it's a load of rubbish.
Right. Okay.
So I do not know the law. I cannot confirm. All I have is them saying that there's a legal reason why they can't share, and I've got a more trusted source saying that's rubbish.
Yeah.
I did ask, well, does this law prevent you from actually fully publicly exposing the details? And the response I got from them was, I don't know.
Right.
Which again sounds like a weird. I mean, I'm fully willing to entertain the fact that if this was a company doing its first vulnerability public disclosure, that they might not know.
Yeah.
But these are guys who, one of their value adds to the work they do is that they're security experts and that they've been in the industry, 10 plus years.
Yeah.
Or each of them. Yeah. Again, two ends of the seesaw. It's really odd. Let's see what else.
You were mentioning just a mild confusion over what a server is?
Oh yeah. So in the questioning, so I was trying to delineate the fact that because when you're in a virtualized environment, if you're in a cloud environment, when you're running on a virtual machine, you can't update the BIOS and you can't update the firmware of any of the chips inside the system because the hypervisor stops you.
Yeah.
You can have root access or admin access, but you're still not at the metal. You're still not like a home PC.
Still not actually running on the base operating system. You're running in a virtualized operating system under that operating system.
Yeah. And so I said, you know, this is less of an issue for those systems, especially for cloud deployments where you never see the metal at all. They turned around and very quickly said, yes, but if the system is already compromised, then you have a problem. Which is fair, but missing the point. And then you know, I explained that, you know, a good amount of companies now, what they do is they have their internal server farm, and at each employee's desks they have thin clients that essentially log into customized VMs.
Yeah.
So you don't actually do any work on the thin client; you do it all in the company's servers.
Yeah, that's how a lot of even like schools in the UK do it. I know I wasn't too long ago in school, and that's how we were doing it at college. Yeah. Yeah,
and to which the response I got was, well, no, in an enterprise environment, people with workstations, you know, on 4 floors of offices all have separate computers and work on the computers. And I turned around and said, well, hang on, enterprise in the data center, you're talking about desktop systems. And he went, no, enterprise. So I kind of let that go.
Right.
I think the word we were looking for perhaps is more commercial.
Right, okay.
But
perhaps a language barrier, maybe. I don't. Yeah.
This kind sort of led to a question about, you know, what they think the deployment of Ryzen Pro workstations within Office environments to allow this kind of lateral attack strategy in order to work. And they said it's probably very small, which I agree. It's probably a lot smaller than you think, especially Ryzen Pro. But then they said, well, you know, and then I said, well, you know, how much do you think it's going to be? And they turned around and said, oh, well, analysts have said that they'll have 10% market share by 2020 in server. Then I pointed out, I said, in server, so a virtualized environment. And, you know, I'm not saying that was a series of trick questions, but you know, that was my logical following.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, it kind of one of those, you know, seesaw things, 2 ends are the same. So I guess we should talk about the Viceroy document.
Yeah, I can see a few people mention it in the old chat there. So yeah, I mean, I think the key thing that I really I read through the document, and the most interesting, I think, also the thing that Gamers Nexus pointed out as well is this quite key phrase. I think the second or third paragraph. It's not one of the yellow highlighted elements, but it's certainly one of the key prominent points. And it reads, and this is meant to be a white paper, right? Like this is meant to be a relatively factual document.
In a technology research firm, somebody like Patrick Moorhead Insights, Tirius Research, when they do a white paper, that goes technical and it's detailed. This is a financial firm doing a white paper about a technological event, so it's pretty light on detail because it's almost copy paste of the CTS Labs white paper.
Yeah, so I mean the key line that I'm talking about here is quote, AMD is worth $0.00 and will have no choice but to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in order to effectively deal with repercussions of the recent discoveries. Interesting.
So the point we should make here is that if you look at the date created for the PDF of this document compared to the date created of the CTS Labs white paper, the difference is only 3 hours. So, and you can't write a 25-page Viceroy research document in 3 hours, especially with the graphics and the highlighting and the verification, especially a company like that would perhaps want it to be checked by legal as well, to make sure everything's above board. So it's clear that they got their hands on it early. I believe Viceroy has technically changed their story on this twice now.
Right.
They said that it was emailed to them anonymously a few hours before the full disclosure. Now they're saying they got it at least a day, if not a few days before, though they won't state the source. Now, I'm not going to harp on too much for them not stating the source. I'm press. I have sources that I don't disclose all the time. If I did, then I wouldn't be able to post anything. So I'm not too worried about that. The point is that this is harsh language for a company that's known for short selling stock. If they can if they short sell a stock and if they buy a lot of, I'm not a financial guy, but the way I understand it is, if you short sell a stock, you're basically predicting that the value of the stock will go down and you can make money off of that. So when a negative press event happens for a company, say one of the Kardashians says that Snapchat is a load of crap and it causes the share price to go down, if you are short selling that stock, then you can create a lot of money. So this is a company that's basically going to make money if AMD stock goes to $0. So in order to maximize that effect, they have to use very strong language. And saying language like the stock should be worth 0 because it has a security vulnerability, despite the fact that Spectre and Meltdown were much worse security vulnerabilities for both AMD, Intel, and to a certain extent ARM and Qualcomm and what have you. It's very strong language for what is, in comparison, a minor issue. The link that everybody is making is that the Viceroy Research and CTS Labs are clearly in cahoots. I am not going to make that claim. I'm not going to claim to the contrary either, because I want to see a concrete link. And the only way to perhaps see a concrete link is to look into the financials of these companies, because they're not going to disclose it publicly. I have seen people try to link back, say, well, Viceroy Research was involved in a lot of shady business in South Africa relating to a company, and then they can kind of do this, sort of 6 degrees of separation type of thing to somebody in CTS Labs. That could be possible, but it doesn't actually say anything concrete. Correlation, causation. So while it's possible that there has been collusion between the two, collusion being a very apt word politically at the moment.
Oh dear.
I cannot confirm that link. Yes, it looks dodgy. But I can't confirm it.
So I mean, something that stands out as interesting to me, even though they won't necessarily confirm their source, which, as you say, isn't too unreasonable in itself, is that they do seem to have most definitely had this information potentially even before AMD, which seems like a very strange way to go about releasing a security vulnerability, giving it to a financial institution before the actual company that is affected by it. So
I'm not sure how that falls in the realms of like insider trading. I do know that a couple of people have called for SEC investigations into this, because apparently a lot of short stock was bought a few days ago. That was an anomaly in AMD's stock patterns. So people are saying, well, that's clearly the Viceroy guys or people related to the Viceroy guys. But again, I can't make that claim or whatever. It's just people have seen things going on that look fishy.
Yeah, certainly. So I suppose that kind of leads on, from what you've seen, and obviously we don't necessarily have an entirely full picture right now. I think there's still some things that would be really nice to actually, you know, iron out. But is there anything that you would see considered that something AMD could deal with in terms of more like sort of criminal activity, or is it more this just seems like I suppose a series of unfortunate events?
So I mean, I don't think there's anything AMD can do, you know, with relate to criminality. I mean, these are vulnerabilities, and if they occur in a processor, then it's up to AMD to fix them.
Yeah.
That just goes to, you know, the first part of this story. If the vulnerability exists and it has to be patched, regardless of, you know, the attack surface or the attack vector, it's not good to have these vulnerabilities or processor errata or what have you. So fixing it is always going to be a good thing. Whether there's something financial that's weird going on with CTS Labs and Viceroy, that's kind of for the financial industry to deal with. This it isn't necessarily a tech problem.
Yeah.
So I guess there is one thing that I should have probably brought up a bit earlier. So CTS Labs, I mentioned, started looking into ASMedia chipsets, the USB hubs, USB 3.0 controllers, and they stated that those controllers can have had flaws in them for upwards of 6 years.
Right.
So they've been unpatched, and they cite that ASMedia is, as part of ASUS, is now legally required to do security audits every year for the next 20 years due to rulings based on the lack of security in the chips.
Yeah.
So the CTS Lab guys, after looking at the ASMedia chips, then decided that the next course of action would be to look into AMD Promontory chipsets, because they use the ASMedia hardware.
Right.
And, you know, found the same flaws worked. And then from there, they kind of, you know, it's a bit disjointed. They move on to flaws within the secure OS, the secure processor. So those two only link in the same way that they're both on an AMD platform, not in the way that, well, they could potentially be related to each other, which is an odd point. The other odd thing that was brought up is, well, okay, you've got all these vulnerabilities in ASMedia chipsets. Guess where there's tens of millions of ASMedia chipsets? USB controllers.
Basically every motherboard.
Intel motherboards for the last 5 years. You know, if you've got to think at that point, go, oh, well, it could apply to AMD as well. Well, hang on, it applies to 50 million Intel motherboards.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a discontinuity as well.
Yeah.
If you wanted to make a big name for yourself as a security company, you know, the big fish is Intel.
Yeah.
Unless something is driving you towards AMD. Now, if that's just a personal curiosity, okay, fair enough. If that's financial incentive, that's a little different.
Yeah.
And it's nothing that at this point anybody can confirm either.
Yeah.
The other thing is, so the second set of vulnerabilities revolve around the secure processor.
Yeah.
Built on this ARM Cortex-A5.
Yeah.
The secure OS is built, the base of it is built by a company called Trustonic, and their T-Base OS, to which AMD adds their own secret source and layers of software in order to help control it. Now, if you find a bug in what is essentially ARM Trust Zone, guess where there's hundreds of millions of ARM Trust Zone components? Every Android processor, every Android smartphone processor.
My phone.
Yeah. So if there's a flaw with the fundamental architecture of an ARM Cortex-A5, and that has propagated through to the higher up ARM cores, you know, again, are we playing Show the Phones again? I've got a stack of 10.
God, you win.
But I mean, yeah. So this company has, you know, potential to go after ASMedia chipsets, ASMedia controllers, and the secure processor systems. That's, you know, hundreds of millions plus tens of millions versus how much is Ryzen deployed in the market by comparison. I mean, yes, it's more than it was 2 years ago,
Yeah.
but compared to Intel or Android, it's really weird.
Yeah.
So I will say, when we kind of put it to this, have you reached out to ARM? Have you reached out to Trustonic about this issue? They turned around and said, well, we don't think they need to get involved. The security issues that they found, they say, are through all the added layers that AMD have added on,
Right.
that they say have broken Trustonic's security levels.
Right. Did you not just say that the way that they found the chipset vulnerabilities were that they were using vulnerabilities from ASMedia?
They know that that's part of their explanation.
Yeah. So does that not contradict themselves a little bit if they're not contacting ASMedia?
Well, maybe ASMedia paid them to search the vulnerabilities. Nobody knows.
Okay.
They tell us. I mean, it's what I agree with you. That's along the same lines of why haven't you tried ARM? I necessarily didn't think of that because ARM is the bigger target in that instance.
Yeah.
And then so we reached out to ARM, and the response we got is basically customers that use our IP can implement. Well, they can implement it in so many different ways that ultimately, by the time it comes to an end product, they have no knowledge, even at a high level, what's going on.
Right.
Because they're an IP company, and you just sell them a configurable block basically, and it's up to whoever orders it. But the issue is, if this is down to the implementation of ARM Trust Zone based on T-Base and Trustonic's OS and additional, then how other people do it could also be susceptible. If there are very easy traps in the software stack after you customize T-Base, that things that should be common sense, that traps that are falling people into, again, you could end up with hundreds of millions of vulnerable smartphones. So in this circumstance, there are a couple of flags that say they're a bigger fish to fry. That doesn't distract from the fact that the vulnerabilities exist and need to be patched, or at least if they do actually exist. But everything we've seen seems to think that they are.
Yeah.
The other side of the story again is, are all these other systems vulnerable? And in the case of ASMedia chipset base, yes. In the case of the Trust Zone stuff, maybe.
Yeah.
Mind you, CTS Labs had a lot of maybes on what could be vulnerable with some of their stuff as well. So,
including even things that they say they have in-house but didn't test.
Well, it's to do that. It's kind of, we look at the code of the platform, and it's the same as before. So we can say yes, it is vulnerable, but we haven't done the actual test. But again, it should be as simple as running an exe to verify, rather than just putting a maybe in the graph.
Yeah.
So.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the majority of the things that I have noted, at least. Obviously, you've had some more interesting discussions with CTS Labs themselves and that sort of stuff. Is there anything that else that you'd kind of like to make clear, or see if there's any actual interesting questions?
I had a lot of work to do this week that went out the window. Can I have my week back? No, I mean, for as much as I mean, I've been on this topic from when it was announced, and I've tried to stay on top of all the information that's come out. I couldn't do that with Meltdown and Spectre because of CES.
Yeah.
And this stuff is totally interesting if we bifurcate the stories. If we take the vulnerabilities as one side, and we take who CTS Labs is for the other. The additional thing is to say that one thing that kind of worried a number of people is that this could be a new paradigm for future security disclosure. If companies now feel the need that in order to generate media coverage, sorry, guilty, I was skeptical from the beginning, and I made it clear, but I still had to report it because in case these were actual vulnerabilities. If bigger companies now feel the need to do 0-day, 1-day disclosures of massive security vulnerabilities, then I'm not saying it's going to hit the fan, but it can hit the fan. Thankfully, one of my contacts at a security firm did say that the customers he works with were absolutely appalled by the disclosure method, and they still will be sticking to 30, 90-day disclosure, responsible disclosure times. So that gave me a bit of hope. But the worry when this all kind of took off was, I hope this isn't the norm.
Yeah. Or at least for potential newcomers to the security industry who aren't necessarily in established companies that are happy to stick to that.
Yeah, I mean, if it would, then I might have to end up hiring a separate editor just for security stuff.
Yeah. Expensive.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's a couple of comments mentioning any sort of link to Intel with this. I don't think I've seen any form of actual fact or actual evidence to link to that. So I think that's probably a bit inflammatory to.
When the announcement, when the stuff became public as it did, obviously people pointed their fingers at Intel, saying, "Well, who's got most to gain from this?" I fully understand their reaction. Nothing pointed to it. I'm not saying that there is nothing that points to. I mean, you can't prove the negative, right? But it does look like it was other parties involved. That being said, Intel is involved in the sense that as media chipsets and controllers
are also involved in a lot. If the vulnerabilities are as they say they were, then this could affect Intel motherboards as well.
So if I was going to talk Intel, that's the line of direction that warrants discussion.
Yeah, I did find it interesting. I got a press release today from Intel saying, "Oh, we fixed all of our, we have fixes for Meltdown Inspector." That kind of surprised me that came out so quickly.
I'm going to call coincidence on that because I had a meeting with Intel last week before this all kicked off about that.
Okay, cool. See, this is a thing that, I get an email and I go, "Oh, this is interesting," and then I get to hear from you and say, "No, actually, that's been in the works." It's like a lot of people seem to miss a lot of that sort of often key information as to, improving negatives, I feel like.
Well, I mean, the Intel thing, the fact that they've now got microcode out there for all systems back to Sandy Bridge. Just waiting for the motherboard manufacturers to update their BIOSes and then make them publicly available. That's a good thing. I mean, especially after the fiasco of having some of the BIOSes that were, not necessarily bricking
and
boot loops and what have you. I mean, that's a good announcement to make. What it does mean for the likes of you and I is that now we have to go through 6 generations of Intel processors to see what the effect is on performance. I've got some initial numbers. It's the newer the system you have, the less of an effect it has. So,
okay, interesting. So, actually, that kind of actually gives credence to the if you have a 4790K or a 3770K and have been thinking about upgrading to something newer. Apparently, that's a slight push to get you to do so. But
yes, it does. Or you could just not update the firmware.
Is that not quite vulnerable though?
I mean, again, it depends. Do you expect your system to be attacked?
Okay.
I mean, I believe we're still not seeing any attacking, not seeing any specified attacks using the Spectre and Meltdown. We've just seen proof of concepts. So
yeah, I think from what I understand, any attacks that have been caught have literally just been copied and pasted the example code. And there have been no otherwise implementations. It's literally just been people who already had viruses and malware and all that sort of stuff who have then copied and pasted the code in to run to try and exploit the vulnerabilities in a different way.
Well, I mean, to take the situation where you're part of a data center or you run your company's IT infrastructure. and you are completely knowledgeable about the software stack that is run.
Yeah.
Or you don't even use a standard OS. There's no outside code that's run. It's just database management or what have you. Then there's not going to be any abnormal code running on your systems. Therefore, you don't necessarily need to update. I mean, depends how you run your security audits. It's a question of some people don't run antiviruses because they trust that on their personal system they know what software they're running. Yeah, that sort of thing.
Charging battery.
But the best argument about that is I'm sure you saw the PUBG server graphs where they were showing 20% load going up to 50% load. After applying the patches. It's I kind of have a funny take on that. I think, well, great, now your server's running at 50% load. If you think 20% load is better, then why not have a million servers at 0%? Jump off the deep end. I mean, I know there are positive and negative arguments to that. Oh, it was Fortnite. Sorry, somebody's pointed out Fortnite. But yeah, no, there are positive and negative ways to look at that. I just thought it was funny that people complaining about server load, but.
Yeah, I remember seeing like Graph 2 and being mildly confused. I mean, I suppose extra server load means extra power usage and less that they can run on that server, but
which are perfectly valid. But if your concern is having minimal server load, then have a million servers.
Yeah, if you can afford it. Cool. So yeah, is there anything else you kind of want to round out, or are we kind of out?
Hopefully Friday or Monday we'll get a full response from AMD. Yeah. I'm in contact with some of the C-level executives about this, so hopefully when they are ready to make an announcement, we'll all get emails.
Yeah. I should be on the press release list, so hopefully.
I'll send you something.
Thanks, man. Is there anyone in the comments who has any specific questions that you think we can answer? Obviously, we've basically kind of covered everything we really know about it to this point, but if there's anything specific we haven't necessarily covered that I guess you might know, feel free to let us know.
This is where we play the Jeopardy theme tune, or if you're in the UK countdown.
I think when is Half-Life 3 coming out? Well, there's a question we can't answer. So yeah, I think that's kind of the main bits. I mean, really to kind of round it out, as far as we know, these exploits are definitely real, and kind of like a little bit more confirmation because no one public has necessarily seen any example code or any of the actual exploits, but it seems like something that AMD will need to be working on, and as I said, we hopefully want to address it, or hopefully hear from them fairly shortly.
So a couple of questions have come up. I'll go through them. Do you consider the CPU reinfecting your computer with malware or spyware a risk? If you're compromised, especially in the skill processor, there's not a lot you can do about it unless AMD actually provides the update. If it comes down to the BIOS, then reflashing the BIOS would usually be the way to go. How do you know if your CPU is hijacked or not? You kind of don't. That's when somebody installs hidden cameras in your house. The only way you detect it is through monitoring how many wireless communications are going through the property, assuming they contact through LTE or 4G or something. So the only way you'd notice that is if you notice extra network activity, but it could be bits, unless they're actually trying to send like a full video feed from your webcam,
Yeah.
You'd notice that if you have a network tool. Otherwise, it could be something that if you leave your computer on at night, it just goes through during the night and sends all the secure information. As a server admin, again, networking, that's how you'd. But I mean, one of the things I perhaps didn't say is not only with some of these exploits, you can enable a keylogger, you could also enable a key presser.
Oh yeah.
Just macros. So
Yeah.
it's if you've ever played a game where your mouse randomly sends you in a 180-degree spin because it's not plugged in correctly or the driver is, then
or you're a child and you wrote a VBS script to mess with your friend's computer next to you at school. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's that. The I guess the best way to protect yourself is disconnect your machine from any network. That would probably do it. Actually, John Miller has an example. Use a VM on your home machine. So install an OS like Windows, then install a virtual machine and just run everything through the virtual machine.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you have some of the difficulties with virtual machines, maybe using graphics cards for pass-through or Windows updating when you least expect it. So there is that. I don't do that.
No.
Though so sometimes when I do dev work with some of my benchmarks, I do use virtual machines because I don't want to keep messing up my main OS system. But
yeah.
That's one thing you can do. It's not necessarily suggested. What's the gut feeling in terms of AMD's response? I fully, if I was a betting man, I would say that they would confirm that most, if not all, of these vulnerabilities exist. They're probably saying the same tack as what I have done and say, well, they're secondary attack vectors. So they require other exploits to go on in the first place, either through browser or Flash or what have you, which they necessarily can't protect against. But again, the window of attack is small. How they manage the message around the severity of an infected system will be interesting. They can either play it down and say, well, the attack surface is so small that it shouldn't be much of an issue, or they can say, well, actually, they probably won't say the full severity unless they actually have a mitigation in place. For some of these things, I mean, the problem with as media, that perhaps could be fixed through driver and hardware. Secure processor, that unless it's actually hardware unchangeable issue, I think that's probably could easily be fixed with a BIOS update. So
I mean, one of the nice things is that a lot of the motherboard vendors seem to be very quick to implement the Agiza updates and that sort of thing. So if this, at least from my point of view anyway, it seems like if there is a BIOS update available, obviously Intel is currently waiting for BIOS updates to roll out for Meltdown Spectre. So it looks, at least from current experience, that they'd be rolling these out relatively quickly.
It's one of the issues that CTS Labs said to us is that the QA process for validating new firmware that has the fixes for these vulnerabilities can take longer than actually finding the mitigations themselves.
Right.
So not only does AMD or a security company working with AMD have to have the mitigation, AMD then has to validate it, and then it goes to say ASUS or ASRock, and then they have to validate it in there, and then they have to validate it for 35 motherboards. But then it might also have to go to Dell, to Supermicro, to all those. So yeah, I mean, to be honest, that can take time. Though when companies have sufficient motivation to make it happen, I'm not saying that happens financially, but it could do. Then it can roll out quick, but that's kind of an unknown factor. But as you say, Spectre Meltdown for new systems is rolling out quite quickly into BIOSes. For the older systems, yeah, you're at the mercy of whoever your motherboard or system vendor is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I suppose an interesting one from Lee's gaming channel. Why is it considered an exploit when someone has to flash your BIOS and have admin privileges? At that point, they're the owner of the PC.
This goes back to what we were saying at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yes, having admin access is kind of game over, but that's only relating to when you want to steal or destroy the system.
Yeah, not necessarily surveillance or long-term data capture, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a mind to nefariously attack a competitor's system, you will want to monitor what they are doing.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily want to go in and destroy.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately where that is. It's the cameras you don't know exist. Or you know, there's a reason why some people put tape over their web cameras, right? It's because sometimes you don't know if they're on.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine it installing into your laptop and turning your, I mean, if embedded EPIC processors are also vulnerable, then you could end up with your baby's webcam having additional monitoring in it. You know, it's, again, assuming somebody gets access, then also elevates their privileges to admin.
Yeah.
And then manages to deliver the payload.
Yeah.
Lots of steps, but still.
So again, high level of high barrier to entry, relatively unlikely for them to ever be actually exploited. But if you are able to exploit them, potentially relatively serious.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ifs.
Yes.
If the Chimera backdoor is in the ASIC and the chipset, how can AMD fix it? So we covered this a bit in the beginning. A lot of these ASICs, a lot of these chipsets have undocumented features. They're enabled to enable, disable, or adjust how certain things work.
Mm-hmm.
So take, for example, a chipset can work in PCIe 3 mode, PCIe 2 mode, or PCIe 1 mode.
Yeah.
That's done with changes at the firmware level, which coincides with what happens on the silicon. You don't need a hardware change to do that. You just flash the firmware. Mm-hmm. If the backdoors are done in such a way that they can't be done through simple register changes to change the way that the chipset operates. One of the things is that these chipsets, well, part of the reason why the vulnerabilities can potentially be bad is that they allow remote code execution. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, if that's possible, then you can update the firmware of the chipset to run your own code. And if your code fixes the backdoors, that's it. You don't need to change the chipset. You're just updating the firmware, just in the same way that you update a BIOS to fix vulnerabilities or disable things or enable things.
Yeah.
AMD has a lot of options, and what came out of our discussion with a few experts is that even third-party chip experts, the ones that do the security audits, mm-hmm. they don't find all the little bells and whistles that companies like AMD and Intel. I mean, how long did Intel's ME stay sort of this mysterious hidden OS for years? And Intel chips have been audited up the wazoo by the Americans, the Chinese, the Israelis, the Russians.
Everyone and their dog.
Yeah. When you're dealing in millions and billions of transistors, there are so many things you can do that that the manufacturer can do. I mean, sometimes even the manufacturer doesn't even document them properly internally. Some engineer has a bright idea but doesn't write it down, and all you get is a badly worded comment in a firmware file. So.
One of the interesting ones was, did CTS explain their financial interests in your phone call?
The moment we started talking about money, they very quickly ended the call, which is something that I'm going to. So the call we had, I have transcribed it. I'm just finishing off the last few paragraphs, and it will be posted on AnandTech hopefully within the next couple of hours. So
that's cool. I'll well, when you tweet it out, I'll retweet it so everyone can check it out too. But yeah, that was it was one of the most interesting things that you mentioned at the start there.
Well, I mean, so I mean, that sounds pretty bad. They did say they only have time for a few questions left. And this was, kind of meant to be, the last couple of minutes. They just ended it a couple of minutes shorter than we thought it would do.
Yeah. And did you talk about the use of the PR agency? Because I understand that's not also standard, if you like.
Well, so the call lasted 47 minutes. I know that because I had to transcribe it.
Yeah.
And that actually went through about half my questions that I had pre-prepared. Because when you do these things, other mini questions come in and take time, and sometimes they tell you stuff you already know, so you have to tell them to be quiet and get on with it. But I did email them a bunch of 15 questions afterwards. So to give you a timeline, the call took place at 6:30 UK time. I sent them a bunch of questions at about midnight UK time. And then as of now, which is 21 hours later, which is technically, essentially nighttime in Israel, they haven't responded to my questions. So either they're busy or due to the nature of the questions, they've decided not to answer. But in those questions, I cover use of the PR firm. It was kind of odd that they didn't have the PR firm on the call. And nobody can seem to get hold of the PR firm. I talk about the subject of Viceroy research because we didn't cover it in the call. I'm not sure how much we're going to get out of them for that because they, if they plead ignorance, we wouldn't know. And I also approached the subject that the CFO, actually one of the people on the call, interestingly, we spoke to the CEO and the CFO, so the Chief Executive Officer and the Chief Financial Officer, not the Chief Technology Officer, who you would think would be on a call like this. So the Chief Financial Officer, according to one of the Security and Exchange Commission's filing in the US, is actually the president of a hedge fund that invests in equity, corporate debt, and special situations. Usually you can't necessarily link the fact that CTS Labs is in collusion with Viceroy, which could benefit a hedge fund. Those three connections cannot be made on any level. However, there is the potential there that some of the investments for the hedge fund could directly benefit from the announcement of what CTS Labs have done or what Viceroy Research has put out. That would I mean, I've asked for details. I doubt I'll get anything, but fingers crossed if they're wanting to be open. That would require a federal investigation to find out. And I'm not entirely sure if that is illegal, because if you find research to affect a company's stock price as an investor, if it's not insider information, if it's something you've done yourself, then you technically can benefit. And again, wordy language in CTS's Lab's disclaimer saying that they could, that part of the research could end up financially benefiting them beyond standard payment structures, or words to that effect. I don't have the exact words. Kind of standard language for a disclaimer. Feels a bit weird to be kind of so out in the open that way. I mean, every research firm you expect to have some sort, have a business model where you get paid. A business, I mean, big companies obviously have stakes in other companies. I mean, say Mubadala, the Abu Dhabi corporate company, owns 20% of AMD or something like that. So that's not necessarily new. The fact that this is a new company, I wouldn't necessarily expect it to have investments in AMD. But like I say, the CFO does have a hedge fund, which could have monies. It's like CSI Miami, where they have the pictures and the string. It's kind of like that. though again, it's all very tenuous links that
Yeah.
people have theorized and others have said definitely exist, but I can't confirm any of that. I would add the fact that the hedge fund is listed as what, $7.4 million, which is tiny for a hedge fund. It's not like a $100 million thing. But
yeah, it's not. I mean, I suppose depending on the trade you make, it could be interesting. But it's, yeah, I should say it's not like $100 million or a $1 billion hedge fund is behind this, if you like. So.
Interesting thing about the hedge fund is it's 7.4 million. They have 24 investors, and you need at least 200,000 to go in. Over the last 5 years or 3 years, it's only gone up 200,000 per year. So somebody's asked any proven records. The only thing about the hedge fund you can find is the SEC filing. So and that doesn't tell you what any of the investments are. They do claim a few exemptions based on the US federal code for hedge funds, but that's nothing necessarily out of the ordinary. Yeah.
So yeah, you at this point you can't say that the hedge fund that he is a owner or
he's executive and president.
Executive and president of have necessarily invested in any way for or against AMD, so
no,
you can't find that out that easily,
no,
without them explicitly telling you. So
correct.
Yeah. So yeah, is there? Can't remember if I saw any other specific ones. Just from your experience and from understanding what these vulnerabilities are, do you have any expectations for when AMD would be able to get any sort of fixes for them? Obviously, it's a lengthy QA process, but any ideas?
Well, hopefully by the weekend or the start of next week, they'll verify if it's true or not.
Yeah.
Beyond that, you need intimate knowledge of the chips and how these exist. It could be. It could be days, it could be months, and CTS Labs bet quite heavily on months. That's why they did this disclosure method.
Yeah. I mean, again, definitely moving into the opinion more than anything else here, but their reasoning for not reasonable disclosure seems very interesting to me, because, you know, even if you give someone a 30 or 90 day 30, 60, 90 day lead period, or even go so far as to do what Google did for Intel with Meltdown Inspector, where you're in the like 6+ month category to get fixes available. It seems like there is, besides headlines for the company and, you know, any affiliated organizations, it seems very strange that you would go that route. Although, as you said, there was contradictions in there.
Yeah, I mean, as a new company trying something new, yeah, that's kind of, you know, have to make a name for yourself. But yeah, some of the reasoning was kind of based on thought, based on feeling, rather than, you know, actual research of this is the way to go. So
yeah. Is there anything else, Sarah? Do you expect responses from other big corporations, Google, Microsoft, Intel, Qualcomm, as they would be similarly effective if admin access is provided to an attacker?
Again, if you have admin access, you can do quite a bit. Whether they are whether they are liable to these specific secondary attacks, if they have a secure processor, maybe. If they have an ASV chipset, probably. Though it's because a lot of the focus is on AMD right now, because all the security companies that have been involved have pushed it on AMD, because it involves AMD secure processor built on ARM, built on Trustonic, and the proprietary chipset built on ASMedia. AMD is that sort of common that everybody's waiting for the response.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to hear something from Intel on the ASMedia USB controllers.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've reached out to ARM, and they've always said no comment because it depends on vendor implementation. So
yeah.
If one of the companies does find out that they have a similar flaw, they're not going to publicly announce it. They're going to fix it and then say they have a fix. Because that's what they do.
Yeah.
Which is fair enough. If nobody knows that the error exists and it's fixed before people know about it, then it doesn't hurt anybody.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you want to cover? I haven't seen any more questions specifically. Or would you rather go finish your article?
Yeah, this needs to be up soon.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, if
yeah.
you...
Cheers, Andy, for having me on.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having joining in and answering all of the interesting questions. Yeah, no, thank you for joining, and obviously feel free to check out both the article that will be out relatively shortly on Anantech and the original article that kind of goes through the vulnerabilities if you want to know any more specific details on them. And yeah, thanks for sticking with us, both Ian and the viewers. And if you have any questions, feel free to hit us up on Twitter. Sure, we can attempt to answer them. Yeah, we'll see what Andy says. Alright, well, thanks guys. I will catch you all later. I need to end the stream on YouTube because apparently that's how this works. And if you missed anything, if you're just coming in, feel free to check out the on-demand, which should be up in, well, as soon as YouTube finishes processing it. Cool. Thanks guys. We'll see you all next week, next Thursday.